He shouldn't have survived. On a frozen highway outside Colorado, a golden retriever puppy lay broken in the snow, his small body shaking, his breath fading. Abandoned in anger, forgotten in the cold. Too young to understand cruelty, only that he was alone. Then a car stopped. Not a hero, not a savior, just a man who chose not to look away. What followed was more than a rescue. It was a test of responsibility, conscience, and the quiet miracles God places in our path when one choice can change a life. This is a story about a puppy who chose where he belonged, and a man who learned that sometimes God speaks through those who cannot. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. And if you believe love and second chances are miracles worth sharing, hit subscribe. This story may stay with you longer than you expect. Winter came early to the outskirts of Colorado, pressing the land under a pale sky and a silence that felt deliberate. Snow fell in slow, steady sheets, muting the highway and flattening the world into white and gray. Emily Parker sat behind the wheel of her compact sedan, hands stiff on the steering wheel. She was 27, slim and slightly underweight, with narrow shoulders and a posture that always seemed braced, as if expecting a blow. Her straight chestnut brown hair was tied hastily at the nape of her neck, a few strands clinging to her cheek. Her skin was fair, almost translucent in the cold light, dark circles faintly visible beneath eyes that once carried warmth and now held only restraint. People often described Emily as quiet, controlled, and polite, but those closest to her knew she had a temper that stayed buried until it broke without warning. On the passenger seat, wrapped in a frayed blanket, was a golden retriever puppy no more than 4 months old. His fur, normally a soft honey color, was dulled by dirt and melted snow, clumping along his small legs. One ear flopped lower than the other, and his dark eyes were too large for his thin face, still holding the trusting openness of something that had not yet learned fear. His body trembled, not only from the cold, but from the constant need to sense where he stood in the world. Emily had bought the puppy during a spring that felt endless. Back then, she was in love with Michael Reed. Michael had been everything Emily believed stability looked like. 30 years old, tall, broad-shouldered, with a neatly trimmed beard and dark hair always combed with care, he carried himself with a quiet confidence that made people listen when he spoke. He worked in construction management, spoke calmly even during conflict, and had grown up in a household where anger was handled behind closed doors. To Emily, Michael's steadiness felt like safety. To Michael, Emily's intensity felt like depth. They bought the puppy together on a warm Saturday morning, laughing at how the small animal stumbled over his own paws. Michael had wanted to name him Cooper. Emily had preferred Sonny. They never settled on either. The breakup came fast and ugly. Accusation raised voices, words meant to wound rather than heal. Michael left the apartment with a suitcase and the certainty that this was final. Emily stayed behind with the puppy and a silence that felt louder than the fights. In the weeks that followed, Emily tried to care. She fed him, walked him, spoke to him when the nights felt too empty. But every time she looked at the puppy, she saw Michael's hands lifting him, Michael's smile, Michael's voice saying they were a family. The puppy became less a living creature and more a reminder she could not escape. That morning, Emily told herself she was doing what was necessary. She said it quietly, over and over, as if repetition could turn cruelty into logic. She slowed the car on the shoulder of the highway where the snow piled higher and the road curved out of sight. The wind rocked the vehicle gently, pushing cold through the seams. Emily opened the passenger door. The puppy stirred immediately, lifting his head, tail wagging weakly as if the movement alone might keep her close. He let out a small sound, not quite a bark, more a breath shaped like hope. "I can't," Emily whispered. Her voice cracked, and she hated that it did. She placed the puppy on the ground, the blanket falling open around him like a mistake. For a moment she hesitated. Her hands hovered, fingers twitching. Then she shut the door and pressed the accelerator. The puppy stood frozen, paws sinking into the snow. Confusion washed over his small body. He took a step, then another, then broke into a clumsy run as the car pulled away. His legs slipped on the ice hidden beneath the powder. He fell hard, yelping as pain shot through his front leg. The highway roared back into motion around him. Tires hissed, wind howled. The puppy tried to stand again, collapsing almost immediately. His breathing came in short, uneven bursts. Blood seeped into the snow from a shallow cut along his side where he had struck the asphalt. He lay still, chest rising and falling, eyes fixed on the disappearing shape of the car that had once meant safety. Minutes passed, or maybe seconds. Time did not behave normally anymore. Snow collected along his fur, melting and refreezing. His body shook, then slowly grew quieter, conserving what little warmth remained. Each passing vehicle sent vibrations through the ground, but none slowed. None stopped. The puppy's eyes began to dull, not closing, just losing focus. The world narrowed to cold and sound, and the faint instinct to hold on. Then, through the snowfall, headlights appeared. They grew brighter, cutting through the white like knives. The puppy lifted his head slightly, more reflex than intention. The lights bore down, too fast, too close. Somewhere inside the car approaching, a human shape leaned forward, hands tightening on the wheel. The snow swallowed the sound that followed. Daniel Walker noticed the shape too late. Snow blurred the edges of the highway, turning distance into guesswork. The headlights caught something low and uneven near the shoulder, a dark stain against white. Daniel's foot slammed on the brake. The car slid slightly before stopping, hazard lights flashing, red pulses swallowed by falling snow. Daniel sat frozen for half a second, heart hammering. He was 34, tall but slightly hunched, with the build of a man who spent long hours leaning forward rather than standing tall. His face was sharply angled, cheekbones pronounced, jaw shadowed by a rough, untrimmed beard that made him look older than he was. His dark hair curled slightly at the ends, always resisting order. Years of field reporting had etched a permanent tension into his posture, alert, guarded, prepared for things to go wrong. He told himself not to look. Then the shape moved. Daniel opened the door. Cold rushed in immediately, sharp and biting, cutting through his coat as if it were paper. He stepped onto the road, boots crunching against ice and gravel, breath fogging thickly in the air. It was a puppy, a golden retriever, impossibly small to be alone out here. No more than 4 months old. His fur, once golden, was soaked dark with slush and blood, clumped together in stiff strands. Snow clung to his belly and legs. One front leg lay twisted at an angle that made Daniel's stomach tighten. The puppy's body shook violently, then stilled, as if even shivering demanded too much energy. Daniel knelt beside him. Up close, the puppy looked worse. His ribs were faintly visible beneath his wet fur. A shallow cut ran along his side, red seeping slowly into the snow. His breathing came in thin, uneven pulls, each one slower than the last. His eyes were open but unfocused, cloudy with pain and exhaustion rather than fear. Daniel had seen injured animals before. He had written about them, photographed them, moved on. This was different. This was close. This was alive. "Hey," Daniel said quietly, his voice instinctively dropping, as if loudness could break something fragile. "Hey, it's okay." The puppy's ear twitched. His eyes shifted slightly, just enough to find Daniel's face. There was no panic in them, no attempt to crawl away, only a tired awareness, as though he understood that moving would cost more than he had left. Daniel hesitated before touching him. His hands hovered, uncertain. Years ago, covering a flood in Louisiana, he had picked up a stray dog too roughly. The animal had panicked, bitten him, run back into the water, and disappeared. The scar on Daniel's wrist was thin, but permanent. It had taught him caution, not distance. Slowly, he slid one gloved hand beneath the puppy's chest. The puppy made a faint sound, not a cry, not a bark, just air escaping his lungs. His body was alarmingly light, lighter than Daniel expected, as if something essential was already leaving him. Daniel's other hand supported the hind legs, careful to avoid the injured one. For a moment, the puppy tensed. Then, instead of struggling, he leaned forward. With the last strength he had, the puppy pressed his head into Daniel's chest, nose burrowing weakly against the thick fabric of his coat. One small paw lifted and curled instinctively, clutching at Daniel's sleeve. The grip was clumsy, uncoordinated, but deliberate. Daniel froze. The puppy did not resist, did not pull away. He simply held on, tightening his paw, as if afraid that letting go, even for a second, would be the end. His breathing hitched, shallow and fast, then slowed again as he stayed pressed against the warmth. It was not trust born of comfort. It was recognition. Somewhere between pain and fading awareness, the puppy seemed to understand that this moment, this human, was his only chance left. Daniel felt it then, sharp and undeniable. The quiet weight of responsibility, the sudden shift from observer to participant. He adjusted his grip instinctively, drawing the puppy closer, shielding him from the wind with his body. "I've got you," Daniel whispered, the words barely audible over the snow. The puppy's paw tightened once more, then went still, resting against Daniel's chest, as if he had given everything he had left. The veterinary clinic smelled of antiseptic and wet wool. Daniel sat rigid on a molded plastic chair in the waiting area, his coat still dusted with melting snow. The puppy had been taken through swinging doors moments earlier, wrapped in towels and wires, and the sudden quiet felt louder than the storm outside. The clock above the reception desk ticked too clearly, each second stretching. A man stepped out from the treatment room and paused when he saw Daniel. Dr. Thomas Hale was in his early 50s, average height, slightly stooped from years leaning over examination tables. His hair had thinned at the crown, gray spreading unevenly through what remained, and rectangular glasses rested low on his nose. His face was calm but tired, the kind of fatigue that came from delivering difficult truths more often than good ones. He spoke gently, not to soften reality, but because harshness had never helped anyone absorb it. "We're doing what we can," Dr. Hale said. "But I need to be honest with you. He lost a lot of heat. There's internal bruising, possibly more. Puppies this young—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "He may not make it through the night." Daniel nodded once. His mouth felt dry. "I'll stay," Daniel said. Dr. Hale studied him for a brief moment, then nodded. "Someone should." The door swung shut again. Daniel leaned back and exhaled slowly, pressing his palms together to stop them from shaking. He had covered nights like this before: hospital corridors after highway pileups, fire station after fatal calls. But this was different. There was no assignment, no deadline, no editor waiting for copy. He pulled his laptop from his bag anyway. Old habits filled the silence. He opened a blank document and began to write, not a report, not a story meant for publication, but fragments, observations, the way snow erased edges, the way a small heartbeat could feel heavier than an entire room. He typed until his fingers warmed, until words became a barrier against helplessness. Hours passed. A nurse came through occasionally, offering coffee, offering nothing at all. The clinic lights dimmed slightly as midnight crept closer. Daniel stood once, paced, then sat again, never drifting far from the closed door. Sometime near dawn, Dr. Hale returned. "He's still with us," the veterinarian said quietly. "That's more than I expected." Relief washed through Daniel so suddenly his vision blurred. He swallowed hard. "Can I see him?" Dr. Hale hesitated, then nodded. Briefly, "Keep your voice low." The puppy lay on a padded table, wrapped in soft blankets, a tiny chest rising and falling beneath them. Tubes ran into his foreleg. A small monitor blinked beside him, numbers steady but fragile. His fur had been cleaned, revealing pale golden patches beneath the grime, though it remained flattened and dull. He looked impossibly small. Daniel stepped closer. The puppy's eyes were open, dark and unfocused, but they shifted slightly when Daniel spoke his name, or rather, the absence of one. "Hey," Daniel murmured. The puppy did not lift his head. He did not wag his tail. But his breathing steadied, just enough to notice. In that moment, Daniel realized the dog needed a name, not because it changed anything medically, but because it changed something else. Because living things deserve to be called. "Sonny," Daniel whispered, almost embarrassed by the simplicity of it. "Because you're still here." The name settled quietly between them. Sonny survived the night. The days that followed blurred together. Daniel slept on the waiting room chair, showered at a gas station down the road, returned with fresh clothes and stale coffee. He wrote articles in the margins of worry, filed them remotely, answered emails with half his attention. Every break between treatments, he stood beside Sonny's table. Sonny healed slowly. His leg was splinted. His body remained weak. He did not bark, not once. He did not try to stand, but he watched. Whenever Daniel entered the room, Sonny's eyes followed him, tracking his movement with careful effort. If Daniel sat, Sonny stilled. If Daniel spoke, Sonny listened. Sometimes, when Daniel reached out, Sonny's tail moved once, barely perceptible, as if testing whether motion was still allowed. The silence unsettled Daniel more than noise ever could. "Some dogs take time," Dr. Hale said one afternoon, noticing Daniel's concern. Trauma doesn't always leave marks you can see. Daniel nodded. He understood that better than he liked. On the 5th day, Daniel carried Sonny outside for the first time, bundled in blankets. The air was still cold, but the storm had passed. Sunlight reflected off clean snow, bright enough to make Daniel squint. Sonny lifted his head slightly, blinking. For a moment, Daniel thought he heard something. A sound forming. A breath preparing to become a bark. It never came, but Sonny leaned into Daniel's chest, eyes half closed, alive. That was enough. Daniel did not mean for the story to grow teeth. It began as a short piece 800 words filed at dawn, stripped of names, written in the careful distance he had learned to use when facts still needed room to breathe. He described a winter highway, a puppy left to die, the silence that followed. He wrote about responsibility without accusation, about the thin line between neglect and cruelty. He posted it online and went back to the clinic, assuming the article would pass quietly through the day like so many others. By noon, his phone would not stop vibrating. Messages stacked faster than he could read them. Editors he barely knew asked for permission to republish. Advocacy groups requested interviews. Strangers filled the comment sections with grief, rage, and gratitude in equal measure. The story leapt from local feeds to national timelines, shared and reshared, each time shedding nuance and gaining momentum. Daniel watched it happen with a dull sense of unease. Sonny slept beside him in the clinic's recovery room, breathing steadily now, a faint warmth returning to his small body. His fur had begun to lift where it had once been plastered flat. He still did not bark. He still did not stand for long. But his eyes were clearer, following movement with quiet attention. Daniel opened his laptop again, not to write, but to search. The vet had mentioned a microchip standard, registered, intact. Daniel waited until Sonny was strong enough for the scan, then asked Dr. Hale for the information. It felt intrusive, like pulling at a thread that did not belong to him, but journalism had trained him to follow what facts offered, not what comfort allowed. The registry returned a name, not Sonny's. The purchase record was clean, legal, dated several months back. A retail breeder in Denver. One buyer listed. A young woman. Address on file. Emily Parker. The laptop slowly, as if the name itself might escape. He did not feel anger right away. What he felt was something colder, recognition. This was not a faceless act. This was not a story that ended at the roadside. It had a beginning, a paper trail, a person who could be found. He did not contact her. He did not need to. The internet did that work for him. Emily Parker read the article late at night, curled on the couch in her apartment, the glow of her phone reflecting off the blank television screen. She had cut her hair shorter since the breakup, the straight chestnut strands now brushing her jaw instead of her shoulders. The change had been impulsive, an attempt to feel lighter. It had not worked. Her skin looked pale under the kitchen light, freckles faint across her nose. She was still slim, still tense, still carrying herself as if bracing for judgment, even when alone. She recognized the story halfway through, not the words, the shape of it, the timeline, the weather, the detail about the blanket, the one she had thrown into the back seat without thinking, frayed at the edges from years of use. Her chest tightened as she scrolled. Each sentence stripped something away. Each shared post felt like a finger pointing closer. By the time she reached the end, her hands were shaking. The comments were worse. People spoke in absolutes, monsters, evil, irredeemable. They speculated, guessed, demanded names. Someone suggested charges. Someone else suggested forgiveness, but only after public shame. Emily shut the phone off and pressed it face down into the couch. She did not cry. She sat very still, breathing shallowly, her mind racing not toward regret, but toward exposure, toward what would happen if someone connected the dots the way she just had, toward her name appearing in headlines, toward losing her job, toward being seen. In the days that followed, she searched obsessively. She found reposts, reactions, videos of strangers discussing the abandoned puppy. She watched interviews Daniel gave, studying his face for anger, for blame. She saw none. That unsettled her more than outrage would have. She told herself she wanted to make things right. But when she opened the registry record again, when she traced the clinic's location through comments and tags, the feeling that rose in her chest was not love. It was fear. Fear of being known. Fear of being defined by a single choice made in anger and pain. Fear that the world would decide who she was before she could decide herself. She drafted messages she never sent. She practiced explanations alone in her kitchen, hands gripping the counter, voice steady but empty. She convinced herself she deserved a chance to reclaim what was legally hers, not because she missed the puppy, but because losing him publicly felt like punishment she had not agreed to serve. Daniel noticed the email requests before he noticed the direct message. Then he saw the name. Emily Parker. He did not open it right away. He closed the laptop and looked at Sunny instead, sleeping quietly, chest rising and falling with a steadiness that still felt like a miracle. The puppy's tail twitched once in a dream. Daniel reached out and rested his hand gently against the warm curve of his side. Outside, the snow had begun to fall again, lighter this time, but persistent. Some truths did not stay buried. They waited. Emily Parker arrived on a gray afternoon when the clinic windows reflected nothing but snow and sky. Daniel noticed her through the glass before she came inside. She stood in the parking lot for a moment, shoulders slightly hunched, as if bracing herself against more than the cold. She was dressed neatly, dark coat, clean boots, but there was tension in the way she held her arms close to her body. Her hair, cut shorter now, framed her face sharply, emphasizing the tight line of her jaw. She looked thinner than she had in the photo attached to the registration file. Her pale skin stretched taut with sleeplessness. When she opened the door, the bell chimed softly. Emily's eyes found Daniel immediately. Up close, her composure felt rehearsed. Her gaze was steady, her lips pressed together, but her fingers twisted the strap of her bag with restless precision. She did not look toward the recovery room at first. She looked at Daniel, measuring him as if trying to decide what kind of man would stand between her and something she believed was hers. "I'm here about the dog," Emily said. Her voice was controlled, almost flat. His name was never Sunny. Daniel stood slowly. He had imagined this moment in fragments, never fully formed. Now that it was here, it felt heavier than expected. "You should leave," he said quietly. Emily inhaled through her nose. "I can't. I'm listed as the legal owner. I have the paperwork." She pulled a folded envelope from her bag, edges worn from handling. Microchip registration. Purchase receipt. Daniel did not reach for it. Behind the half-open door to the recovery room, Sunny stirred. The puppy was stronger now. His fur had regained some of its softness, pale gold catching the light. The splint was still there, his movements cautious and uneven. When Emily took a step closer, Sonny lifted his head. At first, there was confusion, then recognition. Sonny's body stiffened. A tremor ran through him, subtle but unmistakable. His nose lifted, drawing in scent, memory crossing something deeper than pain. His ears flattened slightly. He did not bark. He did not whine. He backed away. Sonny pressed himself against Daniel's legs, leaning hard, as if trying to disappear into the familiar shape of him. His breathing quickened. One paw slid clumsily over Daniel's shoe, gripping fabric instead of ground. Emily froze. "That's not—" She stopped herself. Her voice faltered for half a second before she recovered. "He's scared because he's injured. He doesn't understand." Daniel looked down at Sonny, then back at her. "He understands enough." The clinic staff watched from a distance. Sarah stood near the counter, arms crossed loosely, blonde hair pulled back, her sharp eyes tracking every movement. She said nothing, but her presence was grounding, solid. Emily took another step forward. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said, the words spilling faster now. "I was angry. I was hurt. I never thought—" She stopped, jaw tightening. "That doesn't change the law." "No," Daniel replied. "It doesn't." Silence settled between them, thick and uncomfortable. Emily unfolded the papers with shaking hands and held them out this time, closer. "I can take him somewhere else, a different vet. I'll pay for everything. I just want this to be over." Over. Daniel felt the weight of that word settle in his chest. "Over for who?" he asked. Emily's eyes flicked towards Sonny, then away. "For all of us." The argument escalated without either of them raising their voice. Legal definitions clashed with lived reality. Ownership versus care. Responsibility versus consequence. Emily spoke of contracts and rights. Daniel spoke of abandonment, of what he had found on the road, of what Sonny's body had remembered before his mind could. Sarah stepped in once, gently. "We can arrange mediation," she suggested. "There are protocols." Emily nodded quickly, grateful for structure. Daniel hesitated. He knew the law favored Emily. He knew intent was difficult to prove. He knew that if this went far enough, he could lose Sonny simply because he had done the right thing too late. Sonny shifted again, pressing closer, his body trembling faintly. His eyes never left Daniel's face. That was when doubt crept in. Daniel imagined handing Sonny over, imagined watching him carried away, imagined walking back into the quiet without the small, steady presence that had rearranged something inside him. He also imagined fighting and losing. Imagined Sonny taken anyway, but with bitterness added to the damage. Emily watched him carefully, sensing the shift. "I don't want to fight," she said softly, "but I won't walk away empty-handed." Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Everything he had built since stopping the car seemed suddenly fragile. The story, the bond, the sense of purpose he hadn't realized he was rebuilding. When he opened his eyes again, Sonny was still there, still holding on. And for the first time since this began, Daniel did not know which choice would hurt less. The mediation room was smaller than Daniel expected. It sat at the back of the clinic, repurposed from what had once been a storage office. A narrow table stood in the center, its surface scarred with years of use. 2 chairs on one side, 2 on the other. A space designed for calm, though calm rarely arrived on its own. Emily Parker sat straight-backed, hands folded in her lap. She had chosen a light-colored sweater this time, as if softness could speak on her behalf. Up close, the tension in her face was harder to hide. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her skin dull beneath the fluorescent light. She looked younger here, stripped of distance and certainty, but no less guarded. Across from her, Daniel stood rather than sat. He looked rougher than usual, unshaven, eyes shadowed, jacket worn thin at the elbows. The sharp angles of his face seemed more pronounced now, shaped by nights without rest. Years ago, after covering a courthouse fire that killed 3 people trapped inside, Daniel had learned what it meant to stand through pressure rather than sit beneath it. Since then, stillness had never felt neutral. Between them, Sonny waited. The puppy was placed gently on the floor, his splinted leg carefully supported. He was still small, still fragile, but stronger than he had been days ago. His fur had regained its soft, golden tone, though it remained thin in places. His body trembled slightly, not from pain, but from effort. Sonny looked at Emily first. She leaned forward instinctively, breath catching in her throat. "Sonny," she whispered, using the name for the first time. Her voice broke on the second syllable. Sonny hesitated. His ears flicked, his nose lifted, scent reaching back through memory. He took one uncertain step forward, then stopped. His body stiffened, the way it had before, as if crossing an invisible line. Emily extended her hand, palm up. Her fingers shook. For a moment, it seemed possible. The room held its breath. Then Sonny turned away. He moved slowly, awkwardly, each step uneven. The splinted leg dragged slightly, but he did not stop. He did not look back. He crossed the short distance and pressed his head firmly into Daniel's chest, pushing with what strength he had left. Daniel inhaled sharply. Sonny leaned harder, burying his face against the worn fabric of Daniel's jacket. His tail moved once, then again. A quiet, deliberate choice. The mediator, a middle-aged woman with short dark hair and tired eyes, lowered her pen slowly. She said nothing. Emily's breath came apart. A sound escaped her before she could stop it, sharp and broken. Tears spilled suddenly, uncontrollably, streaking down her pale cheeks. She covered her mouth with one hand, shoulders collapsing inward as if something finally gave way. "I didn't think," she said, the words dissolving. "I didn't think it would matter." She looked at Sonny then, really looked not as property, not as proof, but as a living thing that had endured something she had chosen to walk away from. For the first time since the article, since the fear, since the calculations, Emily felt the weight of it settle fully. She straightened slowly, wiping her face with the sleeve of her sweater. Her voice, when it returned, was quiet and steady in a way it had not been before. "I don't deserve him," she said. Daniel did not respond. He could not. Emily reached for the papers on the table. Her hands no longer shook as she picked up the pen. She signed carefully, each letter deliberate, as if committing the act to memory. When she finished, she slid the documents forward. "I'm letting him go," she said, voluntarily. The mediator nodded and collected the forms. Emily stood. For a moment, she hesitated, then crouched a short distance from Sonny, not close enough to force anything. Sonny glanced at her briefly, then returned his attention to Daniel. Emily smiled faintly through tears. "Take care of him," she said to Daniel. It was not a request. "I will," Daniel replied. Outside, winter remained unchanged. The air was cold. Snow rested along the edges of the parking lot, stubborn and bright. Daniel carried Sonny carefully, cradling him against his chest as he stepped into the daylight. Sonny's head rested beneath Daniel's chin, warm and solid. Daniel felt something unfamiliar settle into place. Not relief, not triumph, but purpose. He was no longer just writing the story. He was living it. Sonny closed his eyes, breathing slow and steady, finally home. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or light. They come quietly, through a choice, a second chance, a heart that refuses to walk away. This story reminds us that God often works through ordinary people in ordinary moments. A pause instead of indifference, compassion instead of anger, love instead of abandonment. What looks like coincidence is often grace in disguise. In our daily lives, we may never know how close someone or some soul is to giving up. A small act of kindness, done at the right moment, can become the miracle that saves a life. If this story touched your heart, please share it so others can be reminded that goodness still exists. Leave a comment to let us know where you're watching from and what this story made you feel. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel to support more stories of hope, redemption, and second chances. May God bless you, protect you, and guide your heart. And may every lost soul, human or animal, find the place where they truly belong.